Ever feel like everything's getting more expensive? Groceries, rent, even breathing. And let's not forget car insurance. It just keeps creeping up. But here's the thing. Insurify makes one part of life easier. It's an insurance comparison site that finds real-time quotes from dozens of top insurers. Insurance companies compete for your business, driving down prices. It's like having a friend who knows all the best deals, but without the smug grin. You could save as much as $1,025 a year, and you might even cut your bill in half. The best part, it's all online. No phone calls, no spam, no nonsense. You can be covered in as little as 10 minutes, and with an excellent star rating on Trustpilot, saving feels less impossible. So why not give it a shot? Visit insurify.com and see how much you can save. That's insurify.com. Average potential savings based on initial quotes received by 183,234 customers seeking insurance through Insurify. Actual savings may vary depending on state of residence, individual circumstances, coverage selections, and insurance provider. Savings results are not guaranteed. It's the season to shop new styles, electronics, and definitely a holiday trip. And what if each time you made a purchase, you got a little something back? With Rakuten, you can earn cash back on just about anything you buy from over 750 stores. So if you're looking to buy a new phone, clothes, skincare, or a getaway, well, you can get cash back. So treat yourself, family, and friends and book that holiday trip now. Start getting cash back today by joining Rakuten. It's free and easy to use, and you can get cash back deposited into your PayPal account or sent to you as a check. It's the smartest way to shop, plain and simple. Start your shopping at Rakuten.ca or get the Rakuten app. That's RAKUTEN.ca. As you've probably heard by now, we've teamed up with BetMGM this season. We'll be using BetMGM lines to make all of our picks, and we'll have special offers for our listeners each week. If you haven't signed up for BetMGM yet, use bonus code The Athletic, and you'll get a 1-year subscription to The Athletic, plus up to a $1,500 first bet offer on your first wager with BetMGM. Here's how it works. Download the BetMGM app and sign up using bonus code The Athletic. Make your first deposit of at least $10. Place your first bet on any game and claim your voucher for a 1-year subscription to The Athletic. See BetMGM.com for terms. U.S. promotional offers not available in D.C., Mississippi, New York, Nevada, Ontario, or Puerto Rico. Gambling problem? Call 1-800-GAMBLER. Available in the U.S. Call 877-8-HOPE-NY or text HOPE-NY 467-369 in New York. Call 1-800-NEXT-STEP in Arizona. 1-800-327-5050 in Massachusetts. 1-800-BETS-OFF in Iowa. 1-800-270-7117 for confidential help in Michigan. 1-800-981-0023 in Puerto Rico. First bet offer for new customers only in partnership with Kansas Crossing Casino and Hotel. Don't forget, if you haven't signed up for BetMGM yet, use bonus code The Athletic, and you'll get a 1-year subscription to The Athletic, plus up to a $1,500 first bet offer on your first wager.
The Athletic.
Will Pedro Acosta win the 2026 MotoGP title as a VR46 Ducati rider? And will we all get $1 million? Not to spoil the episode too much, but probably not on both counts. I'm Valentin Khorounzhiy, with me Simon Patterson. Matt Beer is on holiday right now, so it's another two-man show because the last one went so well. Swimmingly, fantastically. And we're lots of feedback going, oh, this is very natural. You guys are very, like you've been doing this forever. We've got a whole slate of things to discuss, but, the world is proving quite convenient on this one because ideally we talk about the VR46 launch and we talk about the latest on the KTM insolvency. And wouldn't you know it, there's a story doing the rounds that links those two, maybe somewhat dubiously, but, that's all the reason we need. That link is Pedro Acosta's visit to Valentino Rossi's ranch for the 100 kilometers race. That was earlier this month, right? Time no longer makes any sense.
Yeah, it was. About 2 weekends ago?
Yeah. Sounds about right. Simon, how much stock do you put into the idea of Pedro Acosta riding for Valentino Rossi in MotoGP at some point?
If that happens in any world, then it'll be a decision made by Ducati, not by Valentino Rossi. The only way in which I can see Pedro Acosta ending up riding for that team is if Ducati management decide that they need to do everything they can to get Acosta on board, and Rossi finds that actually he just does what he's told these days, because that's what happens whenever you have a factory bike inside your team and you're, essentially the factory supported team in the absence of Pramac these days. So, I mean, everything's possible, but I'd be shocked. I would genuinely, I'd be really, really surprised if we saw some sort of a reality where Acosta of all people ends up riding for Rossi. I think what's more likely is that if KTM does fold off the grid, then Ducati invest fairly heavily in setting up a new squad, a new satellite team, maybe either with Tech 3 or to fill the gap that would be left by them. Presumably Dorna would be okay with that if it meant putting more bikes back in the grid following some sort of a departure from KTM. And that would be built around Acosta with him. Maybe not as a, it's not going to be a factory team, but I'm thinking Rossi's not a factory Honda team in 2001, where it's just a super squad built around him, theoretically in satellite machinery, but with the intention of fighting for a championship.
Suggestion from Italian Gazzetta dello Sport wasn't so much that, plans are afoot or whatever, but that when Acosta showed up for the 100-kilometer race, he and Rossi spoke about it, and there would be some interest from the VR46 side, obviously, to run Acosta, because, if VR46 is going to win a Riders' Championship these days, then somehow making use of the current market conditions to get Pedro Acosta on one of its bikes that's the way to do it. That's what you would do, and that would be your ticket to somehow winning something like that down the line. And even, from Acosta's side, knowing that he's a racing romantic, you would also see the appeal of donning VR46. There are so many things that would need to happen for so many dominoes to fall in place. I mean, the big one, which isn't happening right now, would be KTM withdrawing at the end of this year, which there is currently no suggestion is about to happen. So it would be either a KTM withdrawal or Acosta going to KTM saying, look, you can't fulfill the terms of our current contract, let me go. And KTM going, yeah, sure, whatever, do whatever. That's already the big condition that I think you would really struggle to meet. Then you would have Acosta decide that this is indeed his best course of action. You would have VR46 maneuver its way into a free ride for 2026. And remember, Fabio Di Giannantonio on a 2-year deal with Ducati. So unless there's a spot made for him elsewhere in the Ducati ranks, he isn't going anywhere. So the other option would be Valentino Rossi discarding Franco Morbidelli. Oh, how bad would Morbidelli's season have to be for that to become a reality in 2026? I think as bad as our mind would allow it to comprehend, I think. Yeah, realistically. There's just too many factors. To be honest, this whole story strikes me as kind of peak paddock rumors, where someone says, oh yeah, we talked about this, and then you dig into it, and basically one side did the talking and the other side politely nodded, and then wandered off never to think about it again. I don't think that there's any world in which Pedro Acosta right now is wasting too much time and energy thinking about a switch to VR46, because his primary focus has to be still in KTM, and even if it's not in KTM, you have to think he has better options as well. And I just think this is maybe pie in the sky thinking from someone inside the VR46 camp that wanted a bit of a headline news story pointing their way, a bit of focus on them for a few days that they wouldn't have gotten otherwise. Somebody has to finance the whole thing too. Yeah. In theory, Pedro Acosta is a Red Bull athlete, and obviously through his KTM lifetime, he has been, Red Bull all the way. VR46 and Valentino Rossi personally are a monster team. There's that Montague Capulet thing going on again, which, by the way, I still have not mixed those two drinks together and tried them yet, but I will let listeners know the second that happens. But let's go into the realm of more concrete things. KTM is, the process is still going on there, and the launch is in a few days. We don't know 100% yet what shape that will take. I believe, it's an online launch, but that could be many things, as you've explained to me, Simon, because I think we discussed it, and I was like, well, online launch is a great way to shave off money, and you were like, actually, sometimes that 3-minute, 4-minute, 5-minute presentation can cost a lot. Yeah. So it's not necessarily a sign of scaling back.
It's also worth noting that it's what they've done traditionally the last few years.
Yeah.
It's been a while since there was an in-person KTM launch. And even when there was, it was always a Red Bull thing anyway. It was always done at their Hangar 7 aircraft museum in Salzburg. But last year, whenever there was no hint of any financial issues, they still did a digital launch, essentially. So not reading too much into the format of it right now in terms of what that means. But more curious to see what sort of time we're going to get with the important people associated with KTM, which normally takes the form of some sort of a digital meeting afterwards, but still to be confirmed, and still much more curious about that than seeing the colours of a bike, which, let's be honest, are probably identical to what they were last year anyway.
That's the big question, isn't it? I think a lot will be telegraphed for us in how comfortable KTM is putting any sort of senior figures forward. And senior figures could be riders, but it could, of course, I'm thinking Pit Buyer, the motorsport boss, who I think if you did put somebody up forward, that'd be the person rather than the riders. I think this year you would maybe consider not doing it because I don't know how prepared they are in a non-racing capacity right now, in a non-racing environment, to go in and face a barrage of questions, because every single question, basically, or at least like a good 60% of them, would be about the KTM insolvency. And we know that, obviously, there was a report to begin with that, an interview with Pedro Acosta's manager, Albert Valera, that made it clear they were caught seriously off guard and not happy what was going on. We know now, after Enea Bastianini has split with his manager, Carlo Pernat, from Pernat's mouth to Italian outlet GP1, that the KTM thing played at least a part, and that I think he used the words weighed heavily on both Bastianini and Pernat and played a small part in their separation. So it's, clearly everybody who's signed these new 2-year deals with KTM is less confident about them now than they were at the moment of signing, and that's the thing you would have to discuss.
Well, essentially, yeah. But it's I don't know how much the people in the racing department knew about what's going on bigger picture anyway, and that's fundamentally one of the issues here. Maybe the writers are the best people to let us journalists talk to next week, because they're largely going to say, well, we don't know what's happening either. What can you tell us? And then the conversation moves on, because Pedro Acosta's not sitting at home reading insolvency hearings from Austrian government agencies, because for one, it's not something that he can distract himself with.
Yeah.
And for two, it's not something that has informed any of us particularly about what the direction of the company is going in.
Yeah, or at least in particular the racing department of the company, which the company has been rather keen to position to investors in the outside world as being, a separate entity that's not obviously affected by that, even though it is in certain ways, because it is scaling down.
This episode is brought to you by MeUndies. While MeUndies can't totally help your love life this Valentine's Day, they can offer you insanely comfy undies and loungewear to buy or gift. MeUndies has so many awesome Valentine's Day prints and styles. Plus, you can match with your partner, friends, or even your pets. This Valentine's Day, give the gift that'll keep them thinking of you and score huge site-wide savings at MeUndies.com/Spotify. That's MeUndies.com/Spotify. MeUndies. Comfort from the outside in.
Hey there, Ryan Reynolds here. It's a new year, and you know what that means. No, not the diet. Resolutions. A way for us all to try and do a little bit better than we did last year. And my resolution, unlike big wireless, is to not be a raging and raise the price of wireless on you every chance I get. Give it a try at mintmobile.com/switch.
$45 upfront payment required, equivalent to $15 per month. New customers on first 3-month plan only. Taxes and fees extra. Speed slower above 40 gigabytes on unlimited. See mintmobile.com for details.
So, speaking of those Austrian documents on insolvency hearings, obviously a recent one for KTM, another big one, another big date going past. 2 billion euros of claims made, if I understood that bit correctly. KTM apparently pursuing a 30% repayment quota, which I've read somewhere is the legal minimum in Austria. But at the same time, there was also an argument made that if the creditors did not want KTM to continue and just wanted to get what they can get now, that would be single digits rather than 30%. So, there's going to be a push and pull here and there, because clearly some people will be happy with that repayment quota. Some people will not be so happy. A plan going up for votes next month, late February, I think February 25th. What has publicly happened is CEO Stefan Pierer has stepped down as CEO, handed over to Gottfried Neumeister. Jesus, I should be better at pronouncing these, but
Where do you live again, Val?
No comment. Not in Austria. So there you go. And our friend Gunther Riesinger has reported that the expectation is that Pierer will not remain in majority control of the company. Apparently, there are 20 plus investors being lined up to help out the company. So obviously, the future of the racing department would also depend quite heavily on what those investors want to do. So far, it's both good news, because it seems like all the reporting carries with it confidence that KTM will continue, and that actually even the big spending racing programs aren't as doomed as maybe you would have thought at first. But at the same time, it's still clearly precarious, because this is a question of investors wanting to get a return on loans that they're not going to, well, not on loans, but on debts that they're not going to get fully repaid at this point. And with that in the backdrop, you have to make, I think, a really convincing case that going racing at many millions a year is the thing to do while that's still going on. That's going to increase the repayment available to the creditors currently looking for a payment.
I mean, yes, but also it's not unreasonable to expect every company in the world to have a marketing department. And that's essentially what the race team is.
Of course.
And it's there's equally an opportunity for anyone that buys into this company to make the argument that they have to go racing to continue marketing their product. And
yes.
Yeah, I wouldn't be surprised if there's cutbacks within the racing program. But I don't see a world in which KTM stops racing motorcycles completely. So that means that essentially where we are now is trying to figure out what the shape of what's left looks like. We're not really any closer to knowing the answer to that, to be honest. And it seems very much like the can has kind of been kicked down the road, and the new investors will be the people who are left to make that decision.
Yeah.
Surprisingly, there is, well, maybe it's not surprisingly, because we keep saying this company is fundamentally sound. They have massively overspent, buying things that they didn't need, but the company is fundamentally sound. You know what I mean? It's someone that has bought themselves a ridiculous new car, but their actual base salary is still enough to pay for their groceries and their mortgage.
Yeah.
So we need to see, there's now 23 investors apparently who are interested in buying in. Mm-hmm. We know who two of them are. They're people who are already associated with KTM and with motorbike racing, because one of them is Bajaj Moto, who own 49.9% of KTM, but not of the wider Pierer Mobility Group, and who make a lot of small capacity bikes for them in India. And the other is CF Moto, the Chinese manufacturer, who do a similar role, but who, most importantly, won a Moto3 championship this year with Aspar and David Alonso. So those companies are going to want to keep going racing.
Yeah.
Especially CF Moto, who, by all accounts, are absolutely in love with the idea of racing motorbikes at the minute. And if the decision is left to them, you have to think that there's going to be some good news somewhere for the racing department.
Yeah, according to reporting in Austria, Peter Vogel, who is in charge of the self-administration process, would not be drawn particularly yet on whether the racing expenditure is too much, and on how much it needs to be scaled down. What's the longer term idea there? That's all well and good, and I would totally understand KTM's pushback and the existing KTM structure pushback to try to preserve as much of the program as we can. I also totally 100% understand outside investors and creditors looking at it and wanting not to have this expenditure, seeing this as an easy avenue of money saving. For me, totally makes complete sense. The truth will be somewhere down the middle. Obviously, some of the racing activities will be deemed essential to the marketing, some of the racing activities will be deemed expendable, and what's expendable will not continue. And the question there will be whether the MotoGP program is expendable. I think that, for instance, the Dakar, I imagine, is essential. KTM has just won the Dakar again for the 23rd time and 26 times or something like that. It's a ridiculous record. Recently, a lot more competition from Honda, but still, they're still coming through. This year it was Daniel Sanders with his first victory. That makes sense to me as a KTM marketing avenue, but that's also, I would have to imagine that's a considerably lesser expenditure than what they're spending on the MotoGP program. And there is a catch-22 to the MotoGP program, right? Or not a catch-22, but catch-2022. What did I just make up? Anyway, but it's not quite that, but it's, if you have the program, it has to spend the maximum because there's no point to it otherwise, for me. Either you commit full hog, because then it's worthwhile as marketing because you're going to be winning, or you're done. I don't think there's value in KTM in its current state to have a program that limps around in the middle of the field. And I think the only value there would be, which is relevant for the next 2 years, is that you can't quit right now because there's a contract right now and you would pay big penalties to Dorna under that contract, presumably. But for 27, you have to ideally decide as early as possible because for it to make sense, it has to be super competitive. For me, that's the way I see it.
Yes. I mean, I agree, but there's a question about what competitive is for me.
True.
Is competitive winning races and not fighting for a championship? Because arguably against this all-dominant Ducati super team, that's all that you're going to get for the next 2 years whenever you're fighting against Marc Marquez and Pedro Acosta or Pecco Bagnaia as teammates. So is that going to be enough? Is the opportunity to come and watch the team occasionally finish in the podium or win races going to be enough to keep everyone happy? Is there going to be any level of emotional decision-making here rather than this being a purely financial, by the books, this is the X return from Y that we need from this, which is not what has traditionally happened because we know that Stefan Pierer has been a big advocate for going racing and then there has been a certain emotional attachment to going racing within KTM.
Absolutely.
But, by the sounds of things, some of the new investors are potentially thinking the same way. So we're speculating because there's still so much we don't know. And it's going to be a while before we find out as well, let's be honest. I think we can certainly kind of intimate some things based on what we're learning from the people that we know now are involved, but making a call on this, making a decision on this is probably another month away at the very, very minimum, whenever it comes to the next big meeting on the 27th of February. Am I right?
Yeah, 25th, I think.
25th, there we go.
Like that. Yeah. There is also, I think, an interesting sub-factor to this, and it's the potential impending arrival of Liberty Media as the new MotoGP owner, which I think if I'm somebody at KTM who wants to keep the MotoGP program intact and well-financed and sort of as a non-negotiable part of this rebuild, what I tell them is Liberty will probably get its MotoGP deal cleared through the European Union. At that point, look at Formula One and look at the entities that were there at the start of Liberty and how much more their teams are worth now. So leaving right now, like for instance, the Williams family sold the Williams team to the Rolton Capital, like right before the Liberty boom fully paid off, right before team valuations exploded into basically $1 billion and more. And you would tell investors, hey, let's avoid the same sort of situation with KTM where we sell off the grid spots and somebody else gets them, maybe gets, the project gets, we don't own the racing team anymore and somebody takes it over and suddenly it's a massive asset that could be used. Well, at that point, they wouldn't, if KTM had it, they wouldn't sell the team anyway, but it would still, it would help financial health. We've heard from Aprilia boss Massimo Rivola saying, as team bosses always do, that the two problems in the sport right now are that the show is good and not enough people are watching it, but also the show is good, but it's too expensive. Obviously, they'll always say too expensive, but I presume the decrease in the amount of manufacturers that is being risked here, and with Suzuki having already left, the whole thing should start to cost a lot less going forward. That would be my expectation. It doesn't make sense otherwise, does it?
No, it doesn't. You're right. There is an argument that just the mere act of being on the MotoGP grid is an appreciating asset.
Yes.
And right now, I think we're probably at the point where there's no one else who'd be interested in the grid spots at this minute.
Yeah.
And that might be enough to save KTM's project for the time being, because you know, Pit Buyer needs to go to the new investors and say, this team could be worth 10 times what it's worth in 5 years. But there's no point in selling it right now because no one wants to buy it.
Yeah.
People will want to buy it, but not in a serious way, not in the way that, you know. So, I mean, that in itself is a reason to stay, isn't it?
Absolutely.
And you can do that with this then raises the other question, or the other, you know, problem, that you can do that in a very bare bones way. And it's how bare bones that process is to still allow the bike to be competitive in any way by creating some semblance of development, or, you know, also looking forward to the 2027 rules and completely different bikes. There is an argument for staying just for the sake of staying, but how do you keep riders happy whenever you're staying for the sake of staying?
Yeah.
And you know, we're into a Kawasaki in 2009 scenario.
Yeah, except with a much better rider lineup.
Yeah.
We're into a Kawasaki scenario where all 4 people who have signed up, so not just Pedro Acosta, but all 4 people have signed up to further their careers right now and to get results right now. None of them are aspiring young riders who, well, apart from Acosta, but Acosta's not the patient type. And the other guys, they need results now. They need to win now. Every year for all of them counts. For Brad Binder, it counts. For Maverick Vinales, it counts. For Enea Bastianini, it counts. So if you imagine a KTM that's, you know, just there to see out the rules cycle and see whether it can afford to go racing again, I think a lot of American sports, for instance, have the issue of, you know, even when the sport is healthy, sometimes the team ownership will just decide that it's worth more to it profit-wise to stay in while committing the bare minimum. You know, so you commit what you have to commit for the team to, you know, to have a team to put out a show there without really targeting wins, without really targeting results. And there will be enough players who will go in for that and get paid and won't be too unhappy with that situation. KTM's not in that situation. And if there is a decision at some point for KTM that, you know, we're punting on these 2 next years on 25 and 26 somehow, there's like Acosta can't stay, I guess. But then again, who would sign up for that? Would all 4 guys be instantly unsettled? Would they spend all season? Because that defeats the marketing purpose of the whole exercise, for instance. It's I think for me, it's a very delicate balance.
It does and it doesn't, in that the best way to remind everyone that you're a really good MotoGP rider is to be in the MotoGP grid.
True.
And it's better to be on an undeveloped KTM that's struggling versus their rivals trying to do good things than it is to be, say, a satellite World Superbike rider. And that's probably the alternative for these guys, if they, you know, for at least some of them. Because, yeah, you know, Valentino Rossi might in some bizarre world pick up Pedro Acosta, but he's not going to be rushing out to sign Maverick Vinales. And in, you know, in that scenario, it's better to just stay.
Maybe. I mean, like, it's a question of seats more than a question of talent. I think in a truly free market with the amount of seats, I can't imagine any of these guys going unsigned. Brad Binder, Enea Bastianini, Maverick Vinales. I mean, Honda has 2 seats for 26, for instance. No disrespect to the people Honda has right now, but I would certainly have a very close look at any of the KTM riders, not just Acosta, genuinely any of them, Vinales, Bastianini, as a way to upgrade the lineup. But we're not in that situation yet, and it sounds like from the more recent, you know, creditors meeting and reportings and all that, it doesn't sound like there's a big risk of KTM not seeing out the rules cycle unless the whole thing with creditors breaks down, in which case we enter a whole different scenario. Well, let's go to the VR46 launch now that took place in Jakarta. A second year of the Pertamina title partnership. I was going to say a new livery was unveiled. I'm not entirely sure how fair that is to say, but it's an oldish livery. It's an old livery, the same livery with some extra touches, extra details. Number 46 as a decal behind, sort of in the background, in the shade of the rider numbers. Fabio Gianantonio and new rider Franco Morbidelli obviously in attendance. Valentino Rossi was not in attendance. So we have, this actually leads me to sort of an interesting feeling you have watching the VR46 team right now. So Rossi, reporting will have you believe, for instance, that Rossi is trying to recruit Acosta and trying to, doing rider recruitments, being engaged, and clearly, he will have a lot of love for MotoGP. Is it a little weird then to see him not at the season launch of his MotoGP team? Like, does that make you feel a certain incongruence in your head?
Valentino Rossi is a businessman who's never particularly felt that engaged with running a MotoGP team, to be perfectly honest. The team has always felt like a bit of an afterthought. Something that he saw an opportunity to do and to probably make money from doing. And I'm not at all surprised that he didn't turn up, because at the end of the day, how many races did he turn up to watch them race in over the last 2 seasons? Very few. It's just not been, he's not been super engaged with this team. So to say him there, don't think really means anything. Don't really read too much into it as any sort of change over what we've seen the past few years, especially whenever the team launch is going to be in Jakarta and not, he was at the team launch last year, but the team launch last year was in Rimini. It was just down the road from home. It's a bit of a difference in flying 20 hours across the world and back, despite the fact that I'm sure there was quite a bit of pressure from Indonesian sponsors for him to be there.
Yeah, I mean, just to throw in a little bit of behind the scenes, we were told that there would be VR46 team senior figures media availability, and that's still coming later. That hasn't quite coincided with the launch. It'll be in a few days. But we were told that, some senior figures will be made available, and immediately the first guess was, it's got to be Uccio Salucci and Pablo Nieto. For me, there was not really even a thought that, Valentino Rossi might be one of the team figures, which is, it's not a problem. It's just, it's always interesting because it's the team that carries his name, and he is the most recognizable figure in MotoGP. And you would think that at every opportunity, you would try to shoehorn him in, because you have, for instance, some sporting organizations that have celebrity owners, and there's a part of you that's like, they're not really engaged. I can't imagine they're there on their phone, checking results or following sporting events, etc. It's just, it's a business venture. For Valentino Rossi, it kind of feels the same way, but it's in MotoGP, which is his sport. And it's, again, not a problem, just an interesting situation for the team to exist in. And sort of, I guess, a small part of that is also that they have, as part of its rider lineup now, and as the Ducati contracted part of its lineup, a rider who is not part of the VR46 Academy, which wasn't really the idea to begin with, it feels like, but now is firmly an idea, because obviously they tried to get Firmino Aldeguer to begin with. They signed Fabio Di Giannantonio for last year. Di Giannantonio has not become part of the VR46 lineup. I think we were talking during the launch, and you had the feeling that he still feels slightly like an outsider to the whole operation, right?
I wouldn't call it slightly. I think whenever you've got a rider who's been with the team for a year, who achieved the team's best results last year, going into a team launch, and team management are excitedly talking about the new signing who did very little for the last 5 years. Di Giannantonio probably has the right to feel a little bit out of joint, a little bit discombobulated from the rest of the team, because the general vibe from the whole thing was that this guy still isn't a member of the VR46 Academy, and tough luck, you're never really going to be. Which is unfortunate. It's not unsurprising, but it feeds to this weird thing about VR46. Is it a business to make money, as all MotoGP teams should be? Is it a passion project for Valentino Rossi? Which I doubt it, because he doesn't seem that engaged with it. Is it a plaything where it's a place for his mates to earn jobs that they arguably don't deserve this season? Sorry, Franco Morbidelli. It's an odd one. It's an odd one where it's kind of indicative of the whole team that Fabio Di Giannantonio still doesn't quite fit in, because that kind of half a business, half a friendship thing, it's like a theme that runs the whole way through the team. There's some things that they do that are not very professional, but that's because a large part of it isn't run by professionals. It's run by Valentino Rossi's mates, and who have become professional and who, don't get me wrong, who've proven that they're capable of being there. But the background of the whole thing is not like any other team, and alienating your arguably star rider, the one that the factory wants to be there, over the guy that has a lot to prove this year, seems like a really unusual way to start the season.
We've talked about this slightly earlier, but we've heard from Morbidelli going into the season, as part of the launch. Do you see a scenario in which he also isn't on this bike in 26, or as this has got to be a two-year engagement?
I think it's got to be 2 years, because I don't see a likely replacement for him that fits within the Valentino Rossi. This is all a happy camp.
And has Valentino Rossi ever replaced one of his guys? And again, we're saying it's not like that. It's not a team that he's super engaged in the day-to-day of, but a decision on that level would both go through him and go through his entourage, which is on this kind of matter will be an extension of his wishes.
Yeah.
So have we ever seen Valentino Rossi make a ruthless business decision when it comes to one of his guys?
I don't. Not unless it was being replaced with another one of his guys. And I'm thinking back to kind of the Moto3, Moto2 days of the team. Certainly not in the MotoGP era. Everyone who has left this team in its modern iteration has left because they wanted to go to something better.
Yeah, exactly.
Luca Marini to Repsol Honda, Marco Bezzecchi to Factory Aprilia. No one has departed this team in a long, long time because they were told not to come back. And I'm going back. I'm kind of struggling to think, but maybe we're talking about Romano Fenati era.
Yeah, yeah, you're probably right. And that wasn't a performance thing, so
yeah.
So that is also, we have, it's such an interesting team when we talk about it that way, isn't it? Because it's both. Again, sorry for another Formula One thing, but we have in Formula One constant discussions over whether Aston Martin driver Lance Stroll could ever be fired because his father runs the team, owns the team, is the chairman of Aston Martin. So how could he possibly be operating under the same metrics of free agency? He's not really, when he goes into a contract here, he doesn't really go into a contract here because the contract is with his dad. Well, Valentino Rossi is kind of the dad of Franco Morbidelli and all the other VR46 guys. So, for instance, getting Morbidelli into VR46 this year cannot have been the hardest contract negotiation of their lives, I suspect. But at the same time, if Morbidelli struggles this season like he struggled last year, but I think when I say I mean a little bit worse, because last year was still ultimately sustainable. But if there's any decline or anything like that, we will see tested VR46's, I guess, desire to win in a way, as weird as that sounds, because it is about the desire to win, isn't it? And I think we know they did pursue Fermin Aldeguer, and that wouldn't have been because he's a VR46 favorite son. That would be because they saw a potential, talent to grab on the rise. If they really did talk to Pedro Acosta, if Valentino Rossi really did engage Pedro Acosta, try to tap him up on the idea of riding in Valentino colors one day, for me, that can only be reflective of a desire to win, not just win with your guys, but win. And when I say that, I don't mean that's better necessarily. If your project is to win with your guys, that's fine. I don't think that's a problem. But those two things are incompatible. Either win at all costs or win and maybe lose with your guys, right? Sam, what would you prefer if you, like, from a Valentino Rossi team? Because I remember us talking about it. I think you were the one who wasn't too happy at the idea of VR46 running non-VR46 riders, because it sort of felt right for it to be this in-house thing.
I mean, it comes back to this question of what is the purpose of this team? Is it a business that's there to win races? In which case, you do it with whoever's available. I mean, essentially, that's what they're going to be trying to do in this season with Fabio Di Giannantonio, who is not a VR46 rider, despite, yes, being Italian. So, they've already made the step to an extent for me in having a non-academy rider who is still Italian. And then that kind of shows to me that the big picture intention here is maybe to move away from having academy riders as a whole. I mean, the other thing is that the academy doesn't really exist anymore.
Right.
In the sense that it used to, there's no young talent coming through. They've brought all of this group forward, this kind of amazing super group of talent, Morbidelli, Bagnaia, Bezzecchi. They've all made it to the peak.
Yes.
There's no one else in the ranks that are ever going to do that again. This is, I mean, we've always said that the point of the academy was not to develop young Italian talent. It was to give Valentino Rossi someone to train with. It was the Peter Pan and the Lost Boys thing. And now that he's not training on motorbikes as much, he doesn't need a series of friends, basically. Yeah. So that there's no more academy talent. So there has to fundamentally be a point of moving away from recruiting academy riders, unless essentially Celestino Vietti is preordained to have a MotoGP team, or a MotoGP seat with this team in the future.
Which I still, honestly, I know we talk about Vietti sort of as also there kind of talent, but I think he could still work. It's a question of timing. And if he didn't have this VR46 attachment, then he'd just be one of the guys in Moto2 who sort of got close, but didn't really happen. But I think with this VR46 link, and it's not just a link, with him being part of VR46, not only could it work, but for me, not only could it happen, but for me, it genuinely could work. I think what Moto2 should have taught us by now is that sometimes you'll just try a guy from Moto2 and suddenly he's much better than you expected on a Premier Class bike. And that could be the case with Vietti. And Valentino, if you're listening, give it a shot at some point, I guess. Unless you can sign Pedro Acosta, in which case, probably do that. Well, that'll be it from us today. A lot more sane than it was the last time. That's disappointing.
Yeah, it's boring, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's because we're talking about, boring things like companies going into administration.
I mean, it's probably not boring for the people going through the actual administration, but yeah. So.
No, that's true.
Here's I guess a non-boring part of it. I was reading through those reports, and there was a part of it that said production is going to restart in mid-March, and even though I have some semblance of an education, I took economics in university at some point, I was like, but there's bikes you can't sell, right? There's like surplus. Why do you need to produce new bikes? If any listeners have any idea and can answer me, you can give me a good answer, because so far my only guess is it's like Keynesian economics. You work because you gotta have work, so you work. But maybe there's probably a much, much better reason for it. Anyway, that'll be it from us today. Next up, the KTM launch, isn't it?
Team launches.
Yeah. It's going to be the KTM launch, which I think you won't be around for.
I will be in the air for en route to Malaysia for the Yamaha and Pramac launch, and then Jakarta for the Repsol Honda launch. No, it's not.
Wow. Right. And I didn't even notice that.
One of those this year.
Yeah.
This is the first one of those this year.
And after that, preseason testing.
Testing. Actual motorbikes on track.
How time flies. Extra couple of months of the off season would have been okay. Would have been acceptable. See you then.
The Athletic.
Hello, I'm Ian McIntosh and I'm the host of the Daily Football Briefing. What is the Daily Football Briefing? It's a special 10-minute daily show designed to bring you up to speed with the most important stories from across the football world. Except on Monday mornings when it's 15 minutes and we try to cram in the results, standings and stories from the top 10 leagues on the planet. Or at least the top 10 leagues that I run on a Football Manager save. Follow this show today and you'll never miss another big story again, whether it's news that the Athletic has just broken. David Ornstein, what happened? News from outside the Premier League that other podcasts might ignore.
That is a difficult one to explain, so let's go bit by bit.
Or it's Champions League week and you just need someone to put it all into context.
It's made for a very useful away point in a difficult game in a difficult week.
Listen to the Daily Football Briefing in 2025. It's out every weekday wherever you get your podcasts.